Okay, yep, I hear you guys. And yes, it is finally time to talk about the Zero Division. The Zero Division is by far and away the most requested topic I get on this channel. They crop up in nearly every video asking me to do a video on these guys, and it's finally time. But I'd be lying to you if I said I hadn't been putting off this video to some degree, and there's a pretty simple reason for that. I feel like the Zero Division has been hotly talked about in Bleach since the series ended, and with good reason. They're a major point of contention among fans. But I don't want to spend the entire video just dunking on these characters, as I feel has been done before. I wanted to bring something new to this conversation. So I've decided I want to take an all-encompassing look at the Zero Division as a whole, as a concept, as individual characters, and see what I think Kubo not only did bad, because yeah, obviously he did something wrong with these guys, but also at what he did well with them, because I don't think they are completely terrible characters. I think they are good inclusions to the Bleach universe, and we'll get into that. So in this video, I want to take a look at the good, the bad, and the extremely disappointing of Bleach's Zero Division. Before we get into that, however, guys, if you haven't subscribed to the video, make sure to hit that button. We are so close to 15,000, which is crazy to think about. But if you love Bleach, you are absolutely in the right place for weekly discussions like this one, long-form content, debates, rankings, stuff like that. And yeah, Bleach Brave Souls, and there's just everything you could want here. So if you're a Bleach fan and you're getting super excited for the anime coming back next year, you're in the right place. Hit that button now. We've also got a good community going on. Follow me on Twitter. Join the Discord. We're getting close to 500 members now, I think, which is kind of crazy. And yeah, if you want to subscribe and be a part of the community, that would be amazing. Really, where do you begin with the Zero Division? They are such a contentious topic among Bleach fans. I think some people like these guys, but I think the prevailing thought truly is how disappointing they actually were. And I think it's a really interesting lesson about managing expectations for something that I feel like was always going to disappoint. I think the best place to start with the Zero Division is the legend of the Zero Division among the Bleach fans, and I'm one of these people. You know, I'm guilty of hyping up the Royal Guard, maybe beyond what we could have ever reasonably expected, but I'm not entirely sure that's fair. I don't think you can pin all the blame on the community in that respect. I think the Zero Division always were going to hold some kind of serious heft. You know, these guys guard the Soul King. And you have to remember that before the Thousand Year Blood War arc blew the doors wide open, all this sort of stuff, the Royal Palace, the Royal Guard, the Soul King, they were regarded as pretty much the biggest untouchable mysteries in Bleach. You know, we knew absolutely nothing about these guys, and we were dying to know more. The Royal Guard were mentioned pretty much properly for the first time by Kyoraku Shunsui in Turn Back the Pendulum arc, when Aizen questions him on the fact that Kiryu Hikifune has been promoted from the 12th Division into the Royal Guard, and Aizen believes that she's been promoted to Central 46, and Kyoraku reveals that's not the case. There's actually a elaborate group of soldiers purposefully there to guard the Soul King. And we obviously know a little bit about the Soul King at this point. We know that Aizen is trying to create an Oken, which is a king's key to gain access to the palace and kill this mysterious figurehead. But we know literally nothing else other than that. We did assume, after what Kyoraku said in the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, that if Aizen ever made it to the Royal Realm, he would have to face off against whatever the Zero Division actually was. But outside of that, we knew absolutely nothing, and speculation was constantly rife. I remember during the Deicide arc, people thought that Aizen may end up facing the Royal Guard. The mysterious foot appearing in Karakura Town, people thought that was the Royal Guard arriving to prevent the creation of the Oken. Obviously it wasn't. And the problem with Aizen was that he never got anywhere close to the Royal Realm. So we never saw any of the Zero Division, we never got any kind of resolution on that speculation back in the day, and that only fueled the fires further. Aizen's ambition was great, but as a villain, Kubo never let him get anywhere near the Soul King. So we were left again wondering what the Zero Division were, what it would take for them to actually act if Aizen defeating the entire Gotei 13 wasn't enough, which I still find kind of weird, but it makes sense when you think about it. The Royal Guard clearly would have been happy to let him step foot on the Royal Palace, but they would have obviously met him at the gates, essentially, so that's really interesting. But I remember thinking back in the day that I was expecting the Royal Guard to be more of a traditional Gotei 13 squad. I thought there would be a captain. I wasn't completely concrete on the actual ranks because I was expecting them to be stronger than your average captain for sure. But I was expecting it to be more of a traditional unit. Fast forward to the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, and things are very different from the get-go. The Vandenriker introduces a brand new enemy who are immediately more ruthless and efficient than Aizen, and they manage to devastate the Soul Society within the first 20 chapters of this arc, which is still crazy to me. And I think a lot of us at this point expected the Royal Guard to show up pretty soon. In fact, Kubo even hinted at it in a previous interview before the final arc came out, saying that yes, he would allow the Royal Guard to appear, although he didn't elaborate on what kind of fashion that would be. Once Yhwach kills Yamamoto, he even specifies that the Zero Division will now arrive since the principles of the Gotei 13 have been destroyed, and he actually planned on waiting for them to come out before striking again. Obviously that doesn't quite work out for him. Ichigo arrives and starts messing things up for him. But finally, when the dust settles on the first invasion, we do finally get that fabled arrival of the Royal Guard. Chapter 516, aptly titled The Squad Zero, really wastes no time. Yhwach and the Vandenreich have only been gone from Soul Society for a single chapter at this point, and the Zero Division are already arriving, and expectations were undeniably very high. As I said already, the Zero Division were carrying an enormous weight with them, the weight of expectation. The expectation of the entire fan base was on these guys, but we had no idea what to expect. And from the get-go, I remember thinking it was more low-key than I had anticipated. The Tenchuren, which is their method of travel, is essentially just some kind of rocket-propelled pillar, and it lands in front of the captains who go and meet them outside the walls of the Seireitei, which I also thought was kind of weird. But I remember thinking, okay, this a single pillar, that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting, essentially, in my mind, I always imagined some kind of royal palatial gate opening and these guys coming out, similar to the gate they used to eventually travel to the royal palace later on in the arc, actually. So I was a little surprised. And then Kyoraku clarifies that actually there are only 5 members of the Zero Division and each of them are captains. And again, I was like, okay, that's not what I was expecting, but I can go with this. And then we get to see them. I want to talk briefly about the initial fan reaction to the Zero Division, and it wasn't good. I remember people being incredibly unhappy with how goofy these guys initially seemed to be, and I think there's a difference between goofy and different. I don't want to overly generalize here, but I think people were really hoping for at least some kind of stoicism, like a serious group of warriors, characters akin to like Byakuya or, someone who prides themselves a bit more. But the Zero Division were very, very different to, I think, how everyone anticipated them to be. And I imagine that is actually what Kubo was going for. The Zero Division arrive, blowing instruments, shouting like, we're the Zero Division, we're the Zero Division, we're here, we're here. They got this flag going on, and it was like very much played up for laughs. And you have to... There's a lot of things to take into account here when it comes to talking about their arrival, because their first impression wasn't fantastic among the fan base. I'm not entirely sure what Kubo was going for here, because the tonal shift was enormous. As readers and characters, we had just been through pretty much the most devastating stretch of chapters we had ever seen in Bleach. The Quincy's first invasion, to this day, is still regarded as pretty much one of the strongest parts of Bleach, but it was so bleak. It even rained in Soul Society for the very first time in the canon manga around the point when Yamamoto was killed. But you have to remember that we have just come from back-to-back chapters of the Shinigami getting their butts kicked, getting their asses handed to them, getting killed left, right, and centre. And yeah, they were killing some Sternritters, but this was the first time we'd ever seen these bad guys, and they made one hell of an impression. Then the Royal Guard arrive, and again, maybe this was the fan base's fault, but we'd already associated them with the most serious of events in Soul Society. And when they finally arrive, they don't seem to act in a way that befits the events that preceded them. No one even mentions Yamamoto, no one even mentions the majority of the Shinigami that have died. None of that is brought up at all. The Royal Guard seem completely aloof, completely distanced from everything that's just happened in the Soul Society. and frankly, they don't seem to care. And I remember people finding that to be very, very jarring, very, very weird, that we've just been through this brutal beatdown of the Soul Society. Byakuya and Kenpachi aren't even here to witness this because they're both comatose, and the Royal Guard don't seem to care at all. In fact, Korinji Tenjiro, who is the sort of brash loudmouth of the Royal Guard, tells Unohana that pretty callously that if, she had been better prepared, they wouldn't all be pushing daisies, as he puts it, which basically means they're all dead. And it was, really, really weird. Some people found it to be a bit tasteless on the Royal Guard's part to just kind of come down and essentially crap all over the Shinigami who had done their best in many ways to fight this villain that they weren't expecting. And you can completely see where the Shinigami are coming from. I don't particularly like Soifon. I think she's prone to almost petulant outbursts that don't really befit a captain, but I had to side with her on this one. She has a go at the Royal Guard, basically saying, we were down here fighting tooth and nail to protect the Seirei, getting killed, and you guys are sitting pretty upstairs, not doing anything about it, and then you have the gall to come down here and basically say that we failed, you didn't help us. But then Korinji replies with an interesting retort, and it's Korinji's reply here that I think really cements the angle Kubo was going for with the Royal Guard. Korinji says, you're the Gotei 13. It's your job to protect the Seirei, and it's our job to protect the Royal Realm. If you can't do that, then you dishonour the name of Gotei. And I thought that was really fascinating. So Kubo intended for the Zero Division and the Gotei 13 to be far more separate than I think I ever anticipated. The mission of protecting the Royal Palace is so intrinsic to the core of their being that they see any failure of the Gotei as just a huge transgression, and I found that to be really fascinating. And I thought it was super interesting because you can see both sides of the argument. I could see where Soifon was coming from, but when Tenjiro corrected her, I could see where he was coming from. And he is right, the Gotei 13 is supposed to be the court guard squads that protect the Seirei. And yeah, they failed. But it's hard not to feel sympathy for them, and it's hard not to react negatively to these new characters who are just coming down here and being like, you guys, you drop the ball hard, you drop the ball really hard, and you expect sympathy from us. And I think it's really important to remember who the Royal Guard actually are. They are the 5 chosen Shinigami there to defend the king, and so they have this self-important view of their righteous mission, which I think is very fair. Moving on, if we look at the Zero Division as a whole, their role in this arc is very similar to, say, the Vizards in the Arrancar arc, and to a lesser extent Execution in the Fullbringer arc. They are the new faction that's introduced primarily to help Ichigo gain some kind of new power or boost his power to fight the villains to come. The Royal Guard, however, are used quite well, I think, in this regard, and this is some of the things I like about them. So I want now to talk about what I really enjoy about the Royal Guard characters as a whole and their concept and all that sort of thing before we get into the negatives a bit later on. So, discussing what I think Kubo did well with the Royal Guard, I immediately have to say their individual designs. Now, when they first arrived, people were not happy with this at all. As I said already, they were expecting a more serious group of characters, more, shall we say, traditional or trope characters that were immediately apparent to be very powerful. However, the majority of the Zero Division make up that personality dichotomy that I've mentioned before about characters like Kisuke and Kyoraku. They have this very, very goofy exterior. They're all kind of messing around, not necessarily taking things seriously, but all 5 of these characters can become incredibly serious and dangerous when the time calls for it. And I kind of like that. The Zero Division are very, very over the top. But in terms of their physical appearance, I love all 5 of them. And I think somehow Kubo completely knocked it out of the park with these guys. Not only are they incredibly unique, but they also fit perfectly among the rest of the captains in the series. Not a single one would stand out to me as being poorly designed compared to their predecessors in the series. Kubo is a master of taking a generic uniform and making it unique for the individual characters. I love that Ichibai you could look at him and be like, he's this typical old bald dude with a beard, but I love the fact that he has the massive monk beads, and that's enough to make him stand out. Korinji has the very short Haori, and he obviously has the whole Yakuza appearance. Oetsu has like a puffer jacket for his Haori. It's just so incredibly well done. But my absolute favourite design out of the 5 of them is, without a doubt, Senjimaru Shutara. She looks incredibly cool. There's so many layers to this design, yet she somehow manages to not look ridiculous. I love the sort of sun headdress she has on. I love that you can't see her arms, but you can see these spider-like appendages she has coming. Though I'm saying it now and it sounds ridiculous, but Kubo's art pulls it off no problem. And combine that with her whole concept, and combine that with her whole spider-like concept. She's like this weaving seamstress. Each one of these weird, like, mechanical arms is like, you know, sewing things. And I think she's just got such a cool design, which, you know, leads me to get a little bit annoyed later on when nothing is revealed about her. But we'll get into that. We will get into that. But Bleach as a series has always been renowned for having incredible art, but if any kind of criticism was directed at that art, well, the biggest one would be no backgrounds, but I think the second biggest one would be it definitely starts to suffer from same face syndrome as Kubo's art style homogenizes as the series goes on. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's anything you could really blame Kubo for. He obviously grew comfortable drawing certain types of faces, but I remember seeing Ginjo and I remember seeing Tsukishima and thinking both of these guys look almost identical to Aizen facially, just the face. And it does kind of throw you off. And then Kajimaru Hidetomo shows up at the start of the Thousand Year Blood Block, and it's like, it's another Aizen. Ivan Asgiero shows up, it's another Aizen. So many of these characters look very similar, and yet somehow, with the Zero Division, Kubo created 5 characters that look nothing like anyone else. They don't look anything like anyone else. The only one that looks remotely similar to anyone is Hikifune in her slimmed down form. She's kind of the generic beautiful woman in Bleach, but in, you know, the fat Hikifune, she looks like no one else. And I really respect Kubo for that. And with many of these characters, it's completely subtle differences. But like Ichibai Hiyosave has a facial makeup that looks like nothing else we've ever seen in the series. You know, he has weirdly shaped eyes, he has massively expressive eyebrows, and Kubo is able to masterfully swap this guy between looking like a goofy Santa Claus to looking like a bloodthirsty demon monk. And I just think the design work on all 5 of these guys is sublime. Some of Kubo's best. And honestly, a lot of people disparage the final arc for this sort of thing, but like I think a lot of the Sternritters look fantastic as well. And you have to remember there's 27 or so of those guys. But characters like Asnot, one of the best designs in the series. Kangdu looks incredible. BG9 Kurge looks incredible. So many of the final arc characters really stand out to me, but we're talking about the Zero Division, and all 5 of them look awesome as far as I'm concerned. Their individual personalities are a little harder to gauge because we don't get to spend too much time with them. Ichibai is a very interesting character. He's very, very authoritative, but he's also it seems like he's fairly easygoing, but I don't think he actually is under the sort of funny exterior. Korinji, kind of your typical brash, hot-headed dude. But he's also not, because he's not particularly reckless. He's actually comes across as very intelligent, I think, despite being the loudmouth, rude guy of the group. Then you have Senjimaru, who is sort of not necessarily quiet, but she's quite biting, she's quite sarcastic. Again, they're all very powerful, so you get the impression that they're all quite sure of their own abilities. I think Hikifune is possibly the one with the least amount of personality. She's not really explored as much as the other four members. You kind of get the motherly vibe from the food that she produces for Ichigo and Renji, but it doesn't necessarily go any further than that. And then Oetsu obviously has this kind of crazy vibe going on where he's like super over the top. Everything's a massive show, and I like that about him. And he is, again, very capable of flip-flopping between super, super, super over the top goofy and like really dangerous. So the personalities, they're fine. They're nothing necessarily home to shout about, but none of these characters gets explored enough to really talk about that sort of thing. And in fact, Can't For Your Own World goes into a bit more detail about Ichibai, which I find to be really interesting. We'll talk about this more in the Can't For Your Own World stuff, but he is one of the progenitor characters of the world, and as such, he has this expanded worldview that I think explains his detachment to the kind of goings-on of the rest of the world, because he is so uninvolved with that sort of thing. He is more concerned about the fabric of the universe itself. Ichibai, I really, really wish Kubo had gone into more, because I think there's so much fascinating lore there. But we'll get into that. Another thing I love about the Zero Division is how seamlessly they are integrated into the universe of Bleach as a whole. I absolutely adored the prerequisite criteria that they all needed to have contributed something to Soul Society's history. That is what gets you the promotion. And I loved that. I thought that was so, so good. It was such a smart way of instantly making them a part of Bleach history, and it immediately makes them important characters, despite already being in the Zero Division. The fact that they have had these prior contributions is just so cool, and it's so smart, even if some of them are not necessarily worthy of that, in my opinion. So Korinji is a weird one. He gets into the Royal Palace for his healing techniques, and I think specifically the healing hot springs he has, and yet they're very impressive, don't get me wrong. He saves Byakuya Kuchiki's life despite Byakuya basically being dead. And we know that Kisuke copied these springs, but is that really worthy of a position in the annals of Soul Society history? I think it might have been cooler if he had actually developed Kaido, the healing Kido. That would have been really cool. But regardless, he gets the hot springs. Hikifune is the creator of the Mod Souls, which, again, I think a few people actually guessed. I think I predicted it in one of my earlier videos, completely shutting down the fillers Oko Yushima. But Hikifune, creator of the Mod Souls. Again, they could have gone into so much about that, because Project Spearhead is barely ever talked about in the series. It's kind of like dealt with in the first few chapters of Bleach and then never talked about again. So, it's tough to say, because Hikifune, that is quite a major contribution, but I don't know, it's also been very irrelevant for a while. But she is also there as well for her Reiatsu imbuing abilities that she grants to Renji and Ichigo. Shutara Senjimaru is the only one out of the 5 where it's never explicitly stated what she does. However, it is mentioned in Can't For Your Own World, and I think it's also very obvious. You can infer what she created just based on her abilities and her skill set. The fact that she's a master seamstress, she's all about weaving, she's all about needles and threads and stuff like that, and she deals with their clothes when they arrive at the Soul Palace. It's very clear to me that she is responsible for the shihakusho that the Shinigami all wear, the uniform of the Soul Society. That seems very obvious to me. Ichibai Hiyosave, pretty fascinating. I remember originally thinking that because he was the monk of perception, I remember believing that he was going to be the one who created the Konso ritual, where the Shinigami purifies the soul. That's what I thought. But no, actually he is in charge of naming everything in the Soul Society. And I thought that was really, really cool. So Ichibai named Shikai, he named Bankai, he probably named Zanpakuto, even though he didn't create it. He probably named Seirete, he named Senzai-Q, he named everything. Basically everything in Soul Society's history can be attributed to Ichibai in terms of its names. I thought that was really cool. But then we get to the main one, which is Oetsu Nimaya, and he is credited with creating the Zanpakuto, and that's kind of crazy. That is huge. I remember finding that out and being like, what? That has game-changing ramifications for the Bleach universe. And we find out a little bit about him that, he has a forge, so he's pretty much responsible for creating the Asauchi, because to create a Zanpakuto, you give an empty Asauchi to a Shinigami who then imprints their soul on it through training, and then being able to perform Shikai is one of the requisites for passing the academy. So Oetsu creates the Asauchis, but he has a unique relationship with them, and that he knows the location of every single Zanpakuto in the Soul Society. And so, utterly fascinating. I found that to be so fascinating. But it's also in the early stages of the Royal Division's appearance that I think Kubo makes a fatal error. And it is this fatal error that leads to people being so disappointed with them in the future. And that is the absurd proclamation that they are combined stronger than the entire Gotei 13. And I remember reading that, and a part of me is hyped, like you're supposed to be. That's the whole point of that sentence, is just to get you excited for these characters. Whether Kubo had any intention of actually following up on that kind of bold claim, I don't know. But there was just no way that was ever going to stick. And you know what? Maybe they are. Ichibai himself is clearly one of the single strongest Shinigami to have ever existed. Same probably goes for Oetsu. It's harder to say about the other three, but they're all obviously very skilled in their own way. But saying they're stronger than the Gotei 13 combined means they're more powerful than Yamamoto, Kyoraku, Kenpachi, Byakuya, Hitsugaya, all these characters put together, and apparently these 5 guys are more powerful than them. And it's such an absurd statement that it's so hard to believe. And when they don't live up to that, it's all the more disappointing, because you kind of feel like, were they ever going to live up to that? And I kind of want to talk now about the fate of the Zero Division, because in my eyes, they were always doomed to die. You know, the Zero Division were always destined to lose at some point. And the problem with that is, not only are they not particularly well-established characters, they are the guys directly in the way of the end game of most major villains in Bleach. If a bad guy in Bleach wants to be more successful than Aizen, which I think was always going to be the way for the final arc, because you naturally build on stuff like that in a story, the Zero Division had no chance of survival. Now, it's the manner of their defeat that gets people so unhappy, but the Zero Division, you have to understand, were pretty much always destined to lose eventually. They were never going to successfully guard the Soul King if the stakes were going to be raised to an adequate point for the final battle. But it is the nature of their loss that gets people so unhappy. So I think it's probably time we talk about that now. We talk about what we don't like about the Zero Division, what was so fundamentally disappointing about them. And this is probably the section of the final arc that is the hardest to defend, I think. And I want to do an entire video, maybe more, defending the final arc, because I truly do love it. I love the final arc to pieces. It's Bleach at its most ambitious, it's Bleach at its most mad, and it's Bleach where the tropes of the series really come out in full force. And depending on what you want from Bleach, you might absolutely love the final arc like I do. But I can totally see why it is eternally frustrating. So let's dive in now to the defeat of the Zero Division and why that was so disappointing. So about 2/3 of the way through the second invasion, Yhwach announces that he is going to assault the royal palace and that he has basically free reign to get in there. By doing so, you can rightly assume that he is going to face off against the Zero Division. And yeah, he arrives in the royal palace, starts trampling the royal palace, and the Zero Division are become aware of his presence. Kubo makes some odd choices immediately off the bat here, and I think it's pretty clear that something was wrong. However, I always wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I always believed he was building to something more with this. So let's look at a timeline of events of what happens. So Yhwach arrives at the palace with Hashwolf and Uryu in tow. Korinji arrives to defend the palace, and this is cool. So far, this is awesome. Korinji arrives literally on the landing platform, has some really cool lines about, this is the royal palace, we don't allow walk-ins here, and he starts fighting the Soldat. So far, so good. I like this. This is the build-up, so I believed anyway, to a bigger fight. Then Kubo starts intercutting it with Giselle, back down on the ground, fighting Ikkaku and Yumichika. And I remember thinking, why are we cutting back to this fight that, let's face it, no one's really that bothered about? We've been waiting for the invasion of the Royal Realm since the Arrancar arc. That's what the entirety of that arc was building to. And now that we're finally here, you're showing me a fight between Giselle and Ikkaku and Yumichika. Like, what is going on? I'm not that bothered, Kubo. I'd rather see the invasion. But Kubo shows us the whole fight. with that. And then he shows us the Pepe fight, and it's like, what do you... But I was calm, because I thought, okay, once these Sturmiter fights are kind of out the way, we'll get a proper battle in the Royal Realm. But this is where the arc is really going off the rails at this point. Random stuff is happening all over the shop. The zombie battles are really messy, and just lots of weird stuff is happening. And then we do finally go back to the Royal Palace. And unfortunately, that messiness permeates into this battle as well. We don't see any of Korinji fighting the Soldat really, because he's immediately struggling with Nyanzel Weisel. Then we do get a good moment where Yhwach is confronted by Senjimaru and the Royal Division soldiers. And I will say that I love the way this was done. I love the way Yhwach silently, defiantly takes a step towards her, going up the steps, not saying a word. And Yamamoto finally gets mentioned, by the way, by the Zero Division when she says, "You've gone mad by defeating Genryusai." But I love that. And she says, "Become the rust on the Soul King's blade." And that was really cool. And then Nyanzel shows up. And this is when things start to get a little bit weird. Yhwach is not really bringing the game yet. And this still feels like build-up to something greater. There's one Sternritter fighting in the Royal Palace, and he is just terrible. Like, Sternritter W is so disappointingly bad. Senjimaru one-shots him. And you're kind of thinking like, okay, she's very powerful, as we were told to believe. Whatever's coming next is going to be big. And then you know what happens. You know what's coming. So Yhwach prepares a proper invasion of the Royal Palace. The Soldat arrive in force to fight the Divine Soldiers, and to fight the Zero Division, he introduces the Schutzstaffel, 4 incredibly powerful Quincy, supposedly his own elite guard made up of the most competent fighters in the Vandenreich: Gerard, Lille, Pernida, and everyone's favourite Askin. And I remember loving that chapter. Chapter 599, Too Early to Win, Too Late to Know, is one of my favourite chapters in the series, because the Schutzstaffel arrive, and I was like, oh my god, yes, Battle Royale in the Royal Palace. Everything is about to go down. We've got one dude for each of the Royal Division. I didn't necessarily think we were going to square off in one-on-ones like that, but I did think we were going to get a proper fight between both sides. And that chapter ends with Lil sniping Senjimaru. And obviously it's not her. I don't think anyone believed it was actually her getting killed. But I remember thinking, like, this is going to be mad. This is going to be like this is going to be the fight we've always wanted to see. And the anatomy of what follows is worth a video itself. But I do not understand how Kubo possibly believed that this would be satisfying or good writing. So, to break it down very briefly, what happens is the Schutzstaffel think that they've killed the Royal Guard. The Royal Guard reveal that to be completely fake. Oetsu takes out every member of the Schutzstaffel on his own. Yhwach revives the Schutzstaffel off-screen the Royal Guard. And that is it. That's all that happens. And it's like, what have you done? What have you've systematically destroyed the Royal Guard in a single showdown. So I think we have to break it down a bit further than that. So let's look at this fight now between, well, it's not even really a fight, between the Zero Division and the Schutzstaffel themselves. Yeah, let's do it. So once the Zero Division reveal themselves to actually be alive and fine, Kiryu Hikifune traps the Schutzstaffel in a massive Tree of Life cage. Really cool stuff. Like, that's the kind of crazy stuff I was expecting to see from these Shinigami. Oetsu then steps forward and somehow takes out every single one of them in pretty much one hit. And that's just bad writing. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do in that situation, it's really bad writing. If you're trying to hype up the Royal Guard, you haven't really succeeded because these villains have never been established before. They're only powerful because you've told us they are powerful. They haven't done anything to prove that. So when they get taken out in one hit, it doesn't really hype up the Royal Guard, it just makes us disappointed in the Quincy's. That's all that does. when the Quincy's are, frankly, inevitably revived in that situation, A, you kind of call rubbish on that, but B, it doesn't hype up the Quincy's, it just makes the Royal Guard really disappointing when they are taken out off-screen. No one wins in this situation, because the Quincy's are first disappointing, then the Royal Guard are disappointing, and no one is hyped up. And it's just so poorly done. A lot of people have criticised Bleach in the past, particularly in the final arc, for having flip-floppy battles that are not even in the slightest. Either someone is kicking someone else's butt, and then some kind of reversal happens, and then the butt kicking happens on the other side, or it's just a straight stomp. And this fight is so emblematic of those problems, it's not even funny. Even though I'm laughing, it's sad laughter. I'm going to do a full video dedicated entirely to this fight because it's so bad. But Uetsu takes out all of these members in like one hit, and it's just nonsensical. I know he claims that his Saya Fushi is a one-hit, one-kill Zanpakuto, but it's like, why? You know, I get that he's supposed to be incredibly powerful. I like that he has a non-traditional sheath because the sword will cut straight through it. But it's not good for us as readers. It doesn't make any sense from a writing perspective to try and hype up the Schutzstaffel and then kill them off immediately, and then do the same for the Royal Guard. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So Uetsu taking out everyone is a flash in the pan moment of coolness. You're like, that was pretty badass. And then you sort of think about the ramifications. You're like, actually, maybe it wasn't. That was actually kind of bad. Because you have to remember as well that a lot of people really wanted to like the Sternritters, but Kubo didn't give us a chance. And when Askin survives Oetsu's onslaught and has a one-on-one with him, what was the point in that? Why would you do that? Why would you... I remember being devastatingly annoyed, and you can see my review of chapter 602. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe that Kubo would resurrect Askin at the end of 601 and then kill him off a chapter later. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense outside of wanting to give Askin a second fight because he is one of the more prominent Sternritters. But it's so badly done. And the annoying thing about the fight as well is no one shows anything off. Oetsu just cuts people down. Gerard attempts to swing at Oetsu. Oetsu kills him one hit. Oetsu kills Lil in one hit. He throws his sword into a giant hand. I know you don't know what Pernida is at that point, but he just lobs his sword into the hood, and apparently that's enough to kill it. The whole thing smacks of just being lazy. I think maybe what I think potentially happened here is that Kubo was beginning to feel the time pressure. He was like, I want to do an entire Royal Realm invasion arc where the Soul Society is now invading Yhwach, and I don't have time to have major fights for all of these characters and have a big battle here. So from that perspective, it makes sense to rush over the Zero Division because we don't know them as characters. We're not as invested in them as we are in the Gotei 13. It was always going to be the Gotei 13 that eventually saves the day in one form or another. It wasn't going to be the Zero Division. The Zero Division are really just scapegoats. And that's what's so disappointing. They were always set up to fail. And whether it's a combination of the fan base's expectation for these characters, but also the blame does lie with Kubo for creating a group of warriors who already had expectations around them, but he did not help himself by being like, the Royal Guard are stronger than all the Gotei 13 combined. So when the Schutzstaffel are revived, apparently stronger than ever somehow, and Oetsu is one-shotted, it's like, right, okay, so Oetsu's just killed all of them, and now he is being killed. It's completely unfair, first of all. It comes out of nowhere that Yhwach just, I don't know, he just kills everyone. Nothing makes sense in this fight. Hikifune and Tenjiro, basically the last time you ever see them in this series is them failing to protect Oetsu. And yeah, the next time you see all the Royal Guard, they are dead. They're lying dead on the floor. Can't For Your Own World confirms they have in fact been killed. And yeah, it's so disappointing to be so invested in the idea of the Royal Guard and have it pulled straight away from you just before they get their chance to shine. And it's so annoying because no one shows anything. Kurinji activates Kinpika. You better believe you don't see what it does. You never see it again in terms of actually being used. Hikifune, Senjimaru, are they going to use their Zanpakutos? No. Why didn't Senjimaru actually just activate her Shikai against Weisel? Like, how hard would that have been? Oh man, I'm getting angry talking about it because it is one of the worst, it's one of the most egregious mistakes that Kubo made was this set of chapters. You know, we didn't need to see Pepe. We didn't need to see Pepe fight. That's 3 chapters that could have been used for this Royal Guard battle. Kubo has never been a planner. He doesn't plan what he writes, and he's admitted that. When he gets to a point in the story where he's stuck, he just introduces more characters. And it's here that problem really just comes to the forefront. And something that people actually cared about, that the community was actually invested in, suffers as a result. And the Royal Guard, maybe they could never have lived up to the idea we had for them, but irregardless, they were handled very, very poorly. And it's just the fact that the battle is such a light switch. It's such a Oetsu kills everyone, then they all come back to life. Nonsensically, pretty much. The Auswahlen makes sense on paper. The execution leaves a bit more to be desired. Again, this is another video in and of itself, but the inconsistencies with Yhwach's Auswahlen are completely absurd in my eyes. Like the fact that Kubo draws and writes this stuff and doesn't seem to realise the mistakes he's making boggles my mind. Like, Nanana and Basby get hit square in the face with the Auswahlen and they survive. Robert Akutrone gets his skin stripped from his body the moment it happens, and there's no explanation for it. Hashwolf says those who are hit with the light, they lose their life. That's not true. Basby and Nanana continue to live. Basby faces off against Hashwolf later on and says those who were hit with the light died. No, they didn't. You're still alive. Not only are you still alive, you have your shrift. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. Nanana keeps his shrift. He keeps his shrift. Like, the idea is, if you are not hit by the light, your Volstendig is stripped away from you. And that's, okay, that's cool. That's consistent with what we see. Little Toto loses her wings. And you can imagine that Basby and Nanana have probably lost their Volstendigs as well, because they never use them again. But they're supposed to lose their lives if they get hit by it. And it's like Kubo mentions that mere panels after it happens. And how has he not realised that he is contradicting himself? Mate, this is a video in and of itself. I don't want to go too deep into the Auswahlen right now. But just that whole section just doesn't make any sense. And then the Schutzstaffel come back for a completely unsatisfying comeback. Lil Barrow is the only one who does anything. He shoots the Royal Guard and says, line up in a row and I'll kill you all at once. You never see Gerard. You see him once. Askin you see once. Pernida uses his newfound powers to break open the Cage of Life. That's pretty cool, I guess. But you're supposed to assume, I think, that the fight between the Schutzstaffel and the Royal Guards happens while Yhwach is fighting Ichibai. And you don't see any of it. The next time you see them, they're all dead. And it's like, okay, I'd have absolutely loved to have seen that instead of seeing Pepe. You know, and these are the decisions that I can't defend Kubo for because they don't make sense. I don't understand what part of him thought people wouldn't want to see the Royal Guard fighting and would want to see Pepe instead. The only thing I can think of is that he really thought that the popularity of characters like Byakuya and Mayuri and Zombie Hitsugaya completely superseded that of these new characters. And if that is true, that it really does betray a lack of confidence and faith in your wider fan base. And it's not hard to blame Kubo for being shook after the Byakuya situation, but yeah, it's just so disappointing. I don't know what more I can say at this point, other than doing a full-on video for the actual anatomy of the battle, but you don't see any of it. And then you do get the fight between Ichibai and Yhwach, and I feel like this fight was supposed to be consolation for not getting an actual fight between the Royal Guards. It feels like that to me. Because the Ichibai fight is everything I think we ever wanted from a Royal Guard battle. Ichibai goes ham against Yhwach. He uses everything at his disposal. He uses incredible Kido. He uses forbidden Kido. That Teppu Satsu move, I think it's called. He uses his Shikai, his Bankai, both of which are insanely creative. Ichimonji is such a cool, powerful Zanpakuto worthy of being wielded by a Royal Guard member. And if you had said to me, back in the sort of late 2010 era, that one day we would get the Quincy Emperor, the revised Emperor of a Quincy army, fighting the leader of the Royal Guard, I would have been like, you are pulling my leg. Like, that sounds like a dream come true. And that fight is incredible, apart from the ending, which is a little bit... I don't really like it that much, but, the rest of the fight is amazing. And it's clearly there to make up for the fact that we don't get anything else. Kubo was like, if I give these guys a fight between the Emperor of the Vandenreich and the leader of the Royal Guard, effectively at this point in time, the leader of the Shinigami as a whole, maybe they'll overlook that we didn't get the rest of the fights. And to some degree, perhaps he's right. It's a good length fight. It's a great fight. Both sides go all out, and it's just everything I wanted from those battles, but I wanted more, and maybe that's on me. I don't know. I was very disappointed with the rest. And then Ichibai dies as well, and then he kind of comes back and you never see him again, and it's like, great. Brilliant. Thanks, Kubo, I guess. It's just... what we really needed context. We really needed, and I was preaching this back in the day, that we would get a flashback of the earliest days of the Soul Society. We would get to see the Zero Division in their earlier days. We would learn more about them, but we know nothing about them. And that's the fundamental difference between them and the Vizards. At least the Vizards got turned back the pendulum. At least Execution... we know more about Giriko Kutsuzawa's past than we do about most of the Zero Division. And it's poor time allocation more than anything else, which led to them being pretty shallow. Can't For Your Own World has done a pretty cool job of explaining more about the Zero Division and about their past as progenitors of the Soul Society. Really cool stuff. But I would have loved to have seen it in the manga. It should have been in the manga, as far as I'm concerned. It should have been in the manga. I do consider Can't For Your Own World to be canon, thank God, but this should have been in the manga. There should have been a 1,000-year flashback. The friend stuff with Hashwolf and Basby, that's awesome, and that's the beginnings of that flashback, and then we don't get any more. When Yhwach ends that chapter by saying, I'm going to call the Stern Ritter, and Shonen Jump is like, we'll find out the creation of the Stern Ritter. No, we don't. Not really. And I was so excited that was going to lead into that 1,000-year flashback that I'd been waiting for, and we don't get it. Really disappointing. Really, there's no other way of putting it. It's crushingly disappointing. And that is one of the big issues with the final arc, is a lack of context to back up the war. It's called the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, and we don't find out jack about the 1,000-Year War, pretty much, other than the Quincy's lost. That's all we find out, really. We don't see any of it. And it's such a shame. Such a shame. But that's pretty much it for the Zero Division, I think. I ended up going on a bit of a rant, I think. I didn't want to dunk on the characters, like I said, and I did talk about what I loved about them. Like, Ichimonji is so cool. It's such a good Zanpakuto. But, like, people wanted to love the Zero Division. And there is a lot to love. I love their designs. I love their contributions to Soul Society history, the way they're integrated into the lore. I wasn't a big fan of Kubo's tonal handling of these characters at the start of their appearance, but I grew to like it. I liked the emphasis on them during the mini sort of training arc. I thought that was cool, even though he skipped over Shutara basically entirely, who was pretty much the coolest one. And Ichibai, again, that's clear time issues, I think. Ichibai is the Royal Guard member. You barely see any of his training. You get a little bit of it and a bit more of Renji, but I'm losing my voice. But yeah, disappointing. There's not really a lot more to say, but I will say more in the future. I'm going to definitely do a video on that fight between or maybe even what could have been, you know, because I have in my head come up with Bankai ideas, so basically all of the Royal Guard and Shikai ideas. I think it's probably pretty obvious that the big spoon is Hikifune Shikai and the big needle is Senjimaru Shikai, or it's their sealed form. It could be the sealed form, because all the Royal Guard, again, another awesome thing about them, they have a weird Zanpakuto, apart from Oetsu, but he's the Zanpakuto creator, so that's fair. And even then, he has a weird sheath, so Kubo just puts so much work into these guys. I always felt that Kubo put more effort into the Royal Guard than he needed to, in many respects. He did such a good job with them, but like with most things in the final arc, it kind of fell apart towards the end. And yeah, they ended up becoming probably the most disappointing faction of all of them in Bleach. I think that's fair to say. But this video has been almost an hour long. If you're still here at this point, I hope you've enjoyed this beefy discussion on the Zero Division. I knew we'd get there eventually. I told you I'd do one on them because I wanted to for ages. But yeah, that's pretty much it from me, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the Zero Division in Bleach. What do you thought of the Royal Guard? Have you enjoyed this discussion on them? Do let me know in the comments. And like I said, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button now and push us towards 15k. That would be amazing. But I really don't think I can think of anything else to say about them just yet. If I do, we'll come back with another video in the future, but I'm not sure my voice can handle it right now. But thank you so much, guys. It has been a pleasure talking about the Royal Guard. And I wish we'd got more. And maybe the anime will give us more. That's a potential video. Talk about what the anime could give us in that fight to make it a lot more fleshed out. Alright guys, but until next time, I shall catch you later. See you then.